Welcome to the Find Your Feminine Fire podcast. I'm your host, renowned sex and relationship coach, Amanda Testa. And if you are looking to reclaim your sexual desire, take sex from a to-do to something you look forward to, and enjoy deeply connected relationships without adding more to your already full plate, then you are in the right place. Listen in to discover how to fan the flames of your feminine fire, fall in love with your sensual self again, and experience intimacy like never before, all in a way that feels really good to your system. Make yourself comfortable and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the podcast. It's your host, Amanda Testa. Today, we are diving into episode 4 of our 6-episode series on sex, creativity, and power. Today, we are talking about safe expression and self-trust. Shame resilience, right? When we are talking sex and creativity, shame is such a huge part that keeps us from expressing ourselves sexually, creatively, and owning our unique expression. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how to create safe spaces for creative and sexual expression, how to overcome shame, criticism, and self-doubt. We're going to explore different forms of expression and how to build self-trust in your expression, in your sexual endeavors, in your creative endeavors, and really the power of good enough. We're going to talk about that as well. So just to give you a little recap of where we have been throughout this series, we have covered quite a lot of ground in this series so far. So in our first episode, we really talked about igniting your life force, the sex creativity connection. And if you have gone to the bonus materials, you can go to amandatesta.com/create, and there you'll get access to the whole mini course with all the bonus materials where we put the pleasure meditation and how to create your spark inventory, like really what it means to get this. Episode 2, we talked about embracing your worth and desires, because to get what we want, we have to feel worthy of what we want. And so throughout that podcast, we talked more about that. And I shared a lot of great tools around embracing your worth, how to do it. And then the bonus materials, you'll find the worthiness meditation and how to create your pleasure palette, which is an incredible tool to find your doorway into pleasure, because there's so many different ways we can access it and access that creative life force. So you need to download that. Again, amandatesta.com/create. Last week in episode 3, we talked about empowering healthy boundaries, and the bonus materials really walk you through that. There's a meditation and a worksheet on what does it mean and how do we empower ourselves and what are the boundaries that we need to put in place. And today we are going to be diving more into what it takes to express ourselves more fully, how we can overcome that shame that keeps us small. First, I want to talk about creating a sacred space. As you've heard me share in this podcast, I am a huge fan of ritual. And there's a really important part of creating a space for play, for creation, for sex, for whatever it is. Because when we can create this physical space, it signals on deeper levels to our body that we value this, right? This is something that is important to us. And as we talked a lot about in the previous weeks, we have to have that layer of safety and of emotional vulnerability so that we can allow ourselves to express more fully. One of the great ways we can do that is create a space, an environment for us to do that with. So one of the easiest ways I love to do that is just to create a ritual space for my practice, whether that's my practice of creativity, my practice of sexuality, any practice I'm doing. And what I love to do is, number one, just clear my space, right? That physical clearing of your space, decluttering, that signals again to your brain, like, oh, there's something important happening here. I better pay attention. And when we look around and our space is free of distraction and clutter, it really helps us settle into our practice much more quickly, right? Versus if you see a pile of work papers, you're like, oh man, I forgot to send that email. And oh, I need to go to the grocery store. And oh my goodness, I totally forgot that I have to schedule that appointment for my kid to go to the dentist, right? That's how it works. So we have to create this container where we are in a boundaried, safe environment, safe enough, right? That we have created for ourselves, that we can create this new experience. So when I'm doing this in the bedroom, what I love to do is maybe I'll light a candle, right? Maybe I will put on some music. Maybe I will change the lighting a little bit. Maybe I will change what I'm wearing, because those are ways we can just set the stage to drop in a little more deeply. When it comes to creating, I have so many art supplies, and I would love if I had enough space to have a full art studio in my home, but I don't right now. So what I love to do is I clear the table upstairs. We have a huge table. I like to clear it fully of everything, put some fresh flowers on there, play some nice music, and I just put out my supplies, whatever I want to be working with. And that way I have a clear palette in which to create. And that's the beauty of creating, whether it's you're creating a pleasurable experience, whether you're creating a piece of artwork, whatever it is, that is kind of the magic of it, right? You have this blank space and everything else is yet to be put on the page, right? It's all unwritten. It's an open, clear space for you to create what you want. So that first step can really help to invite in a deeper level of presence to what you're doing, right? So that's one of my easiest rituals to create. I'll actually put in the bonus section too for this week, a guide on creating your own ritual space so that you'll have that to reference. And then because once we have our space, we are able then to dive in. And when we want to dive in creatively or in the bedroom, there is so much shame that comes up. So shame resilience is a real important part of growing in this area, right? When we think about what are the roots of sexual shame, what are the roots of creative shame? Well, oftentimes it comes from past experiences, right? And maybe sometime coming along, you got the message that this was wrong or bad, or that you were no good, or you're wasting your time, or this is nothing, you're not going to make money doing this, or you just need to focus on being more productive, or whatever the messaging that you heard was, right? When we can pause and kind of go back to the root, that helps us to identify, is this true for me as an adult? Because maybe I heard something when I was younger and it's not really true today, right? It's not true for my 51-year-old self. It's an empowered adult. And I think those are important things to note when you can kind of pause and realize, where is this coming from? Whose voice is this? Is it my own? And if so, is it current information, or is it information I heard when I was a 12-year-old? Or when I was a 15-year-old, or whenever it was, right? Because often for many women, there is such a double-edged sword around sexual expression, right? Because when we're young, when we are coming into our sexuality and our body is blossoming, oftentimes it made the adults around us uncomfortable. And maybe you heard to cover yourself up, or don't move in that way, or stop dancing around naked in front of the window, or whatever it might have been, right? And so those little even messages like that can start to shut down your expression. And again, all the slut shaming, thinking that pleasure is only for certain types of people, which is not good girls, right? Those kind of messages really come into play later in life. And I really love Brené Brown's research on shame. I think it always is handy just to review. So Dr. Brené Brown, I'm sure you're probably familiar with her, but she spent decades studying courage and vulnerability and shame and empathy. And I love her definition of shame because it's so painful, right? Her definition, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So when we feel shame, we get that feeling of I am bad versus guilt, which is kind of a healthy thing. I did something bad, right? And shame resiliency is the ability to recognize shame when we experience it and move through it in a constructive way so we can maintain our authenticity and grow from our experience. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, we have to recognize shame and its triggers. We have to be aware, is this really true? And also, the more we talk about and share our experiences, the more it brings light to the shame, which actually is one of the opposites of shame, is sharing and connection. And so when we can actually speak to what's coming up for us or why we feel shame, there is so much healing in that. We're going to talk more about this next week when we talk about creating a supportive community. But one of the key things is we have to be careful of who we share with at first. We need to make sure that we're sharing with people that are going to celebrate us, people that love us and value us and care about us. And that can start with your journal, right? You can start by just sharing your journal, and also put in bonus resources, a slaying shame workshop that I did that really gives you the time to work through, like, what are the stories that I heard and what is true today? Because of course we can listen to this and say, yes, I'll do that someday, but actually making the time to do it is a different story. So we want to make the time to do it. And a lot of time when we are feeling sexual shame, there could be society taboos, personal experiences, and also just shame about what we desire or our sexual orientation, right? And so we really have to examine where that came from and learn to talk about it openly and without judgment, because this can manifest in so many ways in our lives. Often it's fear of judgment, imposter syndrome, right? And so when we can talk about this, we realize we're not alone in this. This is something that 99.9% of people experience. And I think just even knowing that can just help a little breath, a little breathing room come in. And that vulnerability that it takes for us to even be vulnerable with ourselves to explore these things, it's not easy, but it's very courageous. And when we're vulnerable, that is the birthplace of innovation and creativity and change. Leads to more authentic connections and a fuller experience of life, right? And so when we can have that vulnerability, it enables us to tune in more deeply to what our needs are. It enables us to have those conversations with others. That is so important. We have to let our guard down and share truthfully and honestly, what are our needs? What are our desires? And this is the way we can kind of bring connection more deeply with our partners and even in creativity, right? It's so connected. So what do we do? Now what? Now that we know, what do we do? How do we be more compassionate? Well, there's a lot that I work one-on-one with clients around this, but what I'll share simply is when you feel the shame coming in or when you feel those self-critical thoughts, just pause. And you have to sometimes stand up to that shaming voice within you, right? So this is, again, the power of boundaries I talked about last week. What is it that we are moving towards? What are we moving against? What do we need to stand up for? And often we need to stand up for that inner voice that might be really harsh to us and set a boundary, right? I appreciate you saying that, but I am not going to listen to you right now because I know this is not true for me in this moment. And even just taking that time to just stop that mean voice from talking to you that way, just say, no, I am not going to let you talk to me that way. Like you would protect a good friend, right? If you had a good friend and someone was talking rudely to them, you might step in and be like, I'm not going to let you talk to my friend that way. We have to remember that for ourselves as well and really challenge the messages that induce sexual shame. I think we can really open our minds and realize that so much of that is not true. It is fear-based. And it was taught to us from a perspective of keeping us from growing and embodying that in fuller ways. And also, making mistakes is part of the process, right? We're going to make mistakes. We're human. We're going to make mistakes, but that's okay, right? We can pick ourselves up when we feel the shame. We can pause, tend to ourselves, like tuning in. What is it that I need right now to move through this? Maybe I just need to pause and talk to my partner about what's coming up. Maybe I need to pause and say, you know what? Yesterday, I thought this piece of art was good enough, and I'm going to trust yesterday's mind. I'm not going to listen to today's negative feedback on my piece of art that I thought was beautiful yesterday, right? This thing that I made or the sales page or this copy that I wrote, it's good enough. So I want to talk about expression and why that is a way we can overcome some of this negativity, some of this shame, some of this holding ourselves back. There's an archetype here that I love, the expressionista. So, and if you think about expressionista, this is the part of us that expresses ourselves, that is fully expressed. So when we think about a garden, so as we've worked through these past few weeks, we have our seed, the soul seed, right? These are our needs, our desires, what we need and want. And then when we start to protect those with our healthy boundaries, the gatekeeper from last week, then there's a little flower that starts to bloom, right? This is our expressionista. This is our heart's medicine. And I think that when we can feel about that, we can think about the parts of us that we really love, or the parts of us that are core to our true nature. And when we want to express, this is being able to share our art or to share our sexual selves or to feel comfortable expressing what that looks like for us, expressing our identity. And the more we are caring for our needs, the more we are creating those empowered boundaries that we can negotiate for our needs, then that's when our bloom starts to really come forth. And if we think about the bloom, the expressionista, it is kind of like a teenager in some ways, right? It's just confident, and not all teenagers are, but I'm just saying the energy of like blooming and aliveness. But often, like what I was saying earlier, when we get these shameful messages that stunts our expressionista's growth, right? Our expression gets stunted. And when that happens, then we have to feel like, okay, what would I have needed back then to really grow and emerge in this way that I wanted, right? If I was told in 8th grade that holding hands with a boy would make me go to hell, what would I have need to hear instead? Maybe something along the lines of, when you feel comfortable and you're excited to hold hands with a boy, making sure that you're doing it in a way that feels really good to you, making sure that you're being respected in the process, make sure you're finding the joy in it, that you're finding the pleasure in it, right? Making sure that it's consensual and it's fun for everyone, making sure you like the pressure, making sure all of those things, right? Whatever it is, but just inviting in more of like, what would I have needed to hear? That might have been the wise voice that I needed to hear to be able to feel less stunted in that area. And really, when we allow our expressionista to come forth, we are embodying our true calling. We are embodying our sexuality. We are embodying our creative capacity, right? What do we need to feel fully safe enough to really express ourselves all the way? That is how we liberate our expressionista, our greatest medicine, our aliveness, our life force energy, all this goodness. And again, this is, like I said, shame comes in But what do we need to do to regrow this? Well, as we've talked about in previous weeks, like really tuning into our needs, really growing this sense of sovereignty, really feeling in what are the things that are supportive? What are the things that are nourishing me? What are the things that are helping me to grow that make me feel good? And also in really facing ourselves and the parts of us with love and compassion, the parts that might be hard for us to love, the judgmental parts or the critical parts, really remembering like, where did this come from and giving it back to its source. And again, we'll talk more about surrounding ourselves with healthy people next week. But I wanted to share a little bit of some of the ways I really see shame showing up for my clients. And one of the biggest ones is dimming. Dimming is when people often shut down. They dim their authentic volume. They have a lot of fear and frozenness around bringing their gifts, their sexual expression, their talents forward. And in this experience, it can feel very real and threatening to be seen or heard in your authentic expression, right? It can feel very vulnerable and scary. And so that is something we have to realize and work with. Maybe it's like those fears of like, this is going to be, I know this is really terrible, but I know this is going to sound dumb, but I have nothing original. Everything I've done has been done before. So-and-so does it better. So why should I even try? Or like really a feeling literally like you will die if you share. And I can just tell you a little story about this from my own experience. Is a couple of years ago, I really just had this call. I wanted to sing more. And so I knew that was an edge for me because every time singing, there's a lot wrapped up in this, but every time I was singing, I would always cry and get really emotional and have a really hard time. And so I started working with a singing coach, who's another amazing rebloom coach that I met through my training, Judy McLaren. They're amazing. So one of the things that I remember is the first session with her, I could not even have the Zoom on because we were doing this during COVID. And I was so mortified, like I couldn't even have the screen on and I could barely even sing. And then one of her challenges to me was at the end of our work together that I would sing in public. And I was like, hell no, that will never happen. I would die. And so over the time that we worked together, I mean, there was a lot wrapped up in that, a lot around expression, a lot around shame, a lot around experiences where I didn't get something that I wanted or didn't make a part in a play or whatever it was, like really feeling like I didn't have any talent or I was no good or worthless and all these thoughts that were buried down beneath the not singing. Right. And that fear, like, well, if I share this, I will just be destroyed. And so I might as well not. And then at the end, the challenge was again to sing in public. So I did do karaoke with some friends and I about vomited. I was so petrified. But at the end of the day, I did it and I didn't die. And then I really found a love for karaoke and just having fun singing. I'm not the best singer in the world, but do I love it now? And I can do it without crying? Yes. So I just want to share, like, it can be really real. And often there's many things wrapped up in it. It's not as simple as we think it is, which is why sometimes one-on-one support is necessary. The other side of this is defiance, right? The other side is defiance where, fuck the man, I'll say whatever I want. I'm going to say it loud. I'm going to not care about what anyone else thinks. I'm going to shame you before you can shame me, that type of thing. So how do we help ourselves through this? Well, we have to work and name the sources of our shame. We have to realize that is not ours oftentimes. And those are the basic ways we can work through this, right? That's remembering like there's nothing wrong with you. Your true expression is appreciated and valued. And this is one of the things that we will talk more about next week of cultivating that supportive group. But when we can start to trust ourselves and be a little more kind to ourselves, this is how we change now into cultivating more unshakable self-trust. Because the self-trust piece comes online when we do allow our medicine to flow with safe enough environments, with safe enough people, when we maybe want to try something novel in a sexual experience and it's received well from our partner, right? That kind of empowers us to go deeper. Maybe we drew a picture and we showed it to our kid and they loved it, right? That might be a safe audience for you. But it's thinking, who is that safe audience and how can I share just a little bit? And also realizing that good enough is better. I forget who to attribute this quote to, but the opposite of good is better. I don't know. My husband used to say that all the time because it's so true. Like if we have something that's good enough, we can go back and judge it to death and kind of stifle our expression with over analysis, right? The analysis paralysis stage. And sometimes good enough is all that we can do. And I know for myself, this was a huge growth edge for me because I would hold myself back from doing everything. And my whole business, I sometimes joke, it's like half-assed, but it's not. But that's the joke. It's like, oh my God, I could make everything so much better. But really trusting like this is good enough. If this made a difference for one person, it's good enough. If it's something that you found value in, someone else is going to find value in this as well. And really trusting that and really knowing we don't have to paralyze ourselves trying to be perfect. We don't have to paralyze ourselves trying to look a certain way or be a certain way before we can enjoy more pleasure. Again, this is one of the reasons why that pleasure palette is so key, because we can find the doorway in for us. What is the way that is easy for me to tap into my expression? What are the ways that are easy for me to feel creative and to feel that life force energy flowing through me? And starting small with it. And again, it's this is good enough. What if all I did today for my sensual self was to wash my face very gently with love, right? That can be good enough. And these are ways that we can start to bypass that inner critic, is celebrating what we did. I love how BJ Fogg talks about this in his book, Tiny Habits. And he is a researcher all around what creates change and how do you create healthy habits that actually work. And one of the parts of that is to really celebrate every small step. Really celebrate when you've done something that you're proud of. I love this phrase, shine. This is what BJ Fogg calls that great positive emotion you feel when you are successful. When you do a behavior and you feel successful, your brain goes, whoa, what just happened? I'm going to do that again. And your brain releases neurochemicals and takes notice that you have a strong positive reaction, which is what wires the habit, as we've talked about before. So I think one of the keys is really celebrating and feeling amazing about every small thing that we've done that feels good. We really want to celebrate ourselves, focus on our celebrations, focus on our small wins, focus on our big wins, focus on all the things that we've done, focus on the fact, hey, I listen to this podcast. Hey, I'm doing these things that are feeling like a yes to me. That is where we grow. And that is so huge. So I just want to, first of all, wherever you are right now, take a little minute and celebrate yourself, right? That's the other reason that we have to celebrate, is because when we're talking about shame resilience, really even celebrating, wow, I was brave and I looked at the source of shame, or I was brave and I told that mean voice to shut the hell up. That's huge, right? And then noticing how it feels when you stand up to that shaming voice within you, because it works. I mean, we can't believe everything our brain tells us, because I know for me, that's been a huge journey of shutting that inner critic's mouth. And sometimes it still likes to rear its ugly head and can get the best of me. But I have so many better tools now after doing this for so long that I can realize that I don't have to listen to that. If I was to listen to everything it said, I would never probably get out of the bed. And I have to realize, shut up. I'm not listening to you. Thank you, but no. And we have a choice. So just to recap, what did we talk about today? The importance of creating a safe space for sexual and creative expression, really creating those ritual spaces so that we can honor our creative process, our sexual process. Some steps to overcome shame and judgment, and really some concrete ways to move through that. I wanted how we build safe trust, how we start to build self-trust by trying little things and really celebrating ourselves and letting that grow over time, and really the power of good enough. The power of good enough in creativity and intimacy. And I think that is the key, is that we have to just learn that not everything's going to be perfect, right? It might not be full body orgasms every single time you have sex, but guess what? You can focus on connection. You can focus on something that feels pleasant in your system. You can focus on what is working versus what is not working. And that's how we build that capacity for more. So tune in next week. We're going to go a little deeper on what it takes to surround yourself with a healthy community and going deeper into self-care and supportive communities. Don't forget to go to amandatesta.com/create to get all the additional bonus goodies. And I assure you that if you are working through this and you are doing the practices in these episodes, at the end of these 6 weeks, you're going to have some drastic changes. So I love you. I'm sending you all the best, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Find Your Feminine Fire podcast. If you loved this episode, please go ahead and forward it right now to someone you know would love it. And if you've not had a chance yet to leave us a rave review on Apple Podcasts, please make sure to rate and review if you enjoyed it, as well as make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you want to stay connected, make sure to go to amandatesta.com/thegoods to download your free sensuality activation and stay connected. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.